Hello, my name's Eden. I'm 13, and I used to think the worst thing my family could do was forget to pick me up from school, but that was before my uncle offered to take us on a camping trip, just a fun weekend in the woods, he said. He drugged my parents, hid them beneath the floorboards of a cabin no one ever checked, told everyone they left me behind because they couldn't handle me. Now he's smiling on TV, spending our money, calling himself my savior. I called 911. They told me I sounded confused. But what if I wasn't? What if everything he buried is still breathing, and I'm the only one who hears it? It had been nearly a full day since I came home from that cursed camping trip, and yet nothing felt real. My jeans were still dusty, the back of my neck sunburned from the hike, and the pine smell from the woods still clung to my sleeves. I stood barefoot in the middle of my grandmother's kitchen in Asheville, staring at the bright yellow tile floor like it might split open and explain everything. But nothing did. "You're safe now, honey," Odessa had said, patting my shoulder without meeting my eyes. She was my dad's mother and had always had this way of making everything seem like a polite inconvenience. When I stumbled into her house alone, covered in dirt and dragging my backpack behind me, she didn't scream or cry. She didn't ask where Mom and Dad were. She just made me toast. I tried to tell her. I did. I told her how Uncle Delmar said it would be just a quick weekend trip to the cabin in Pisgah, how we went on a hike that morning and then everything went wrong, how my parents passed out after drinking from water bottles Delmar handed them, and how he told me to go to bed early like a good girl while he dragged them back into the cabin. But she didn't even flinch. Instead, she smiled politely and said, "You've been through a lot. You need to rest." Rest. I wasn't sure how anyone expected me to close my eyes after what I saw. Later that afternoon, one of my aunts, maybe Karen or Julie, I couldn't remember which, leaned over to Odessa and whispered, "She's probably just overwhelmed. Maybe it's a reaction to the trauma." I heard every word. I sat right there on the couch with a blanket around my shoulders, like a stray animal they didn't know what to do with. Delmar came into the house not long after, dressed in pressed slacks and a soft blue shirt. He looked like he'd walked out of a church bulletin. He set his keys down on the counter and gave me the warmest, most rehearsed smile I've ever seen. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, reaching out like he meant to hug me. "Tough weekend, huh?" I backed away. His smile didn't flicker. He didn't need to say a word. His grip on the room was tight. Too tight. "I told Odessa everything," I said, my voice shaking. "I told her what you did." There was a pause. A shift. Just for a second, the mask dropped. Then he chuckled. "Dreams feel real when we're scared, Eden. It's okay to blur the lines." I looked at Odessa. She looked at her shoes. That night, after being told to get some sleep more times than I could count, I locked myself in the guest room. The bed creaked like it hadn't been used in years. I sat cross-legged with a stack of printer paper and a set of cheap markers I found in an old drawer. I started to draw. Mom's eyes, the ropes on her wrists, the trap door in the cabin floor, the boots Delmar wore. I didn't know what else to do. If I couldn't get them to listen, I'd make them see. I laid each page out in a row on the kitchen table the next morning. Odessa walked right by them. So did Delmar. By lunch, they were gone. The house smelled faintly of smoke. I followed it to the backyard, where the metal fire pit was still warm. Ashes fluttered in the wind, some of them the same off-white as my paper. "You shouldn't leave things lying around," Delmar said, strolling up behind me. "Not everything belongs in the real world." I turned to face him, heart pounding. They weren't dreams. He crouched beside the fire pit and poked at the ashes with a stick, like he was roasting marshmallows. "Let's not confuse memories with nightmares, okay?" I couldn't speak. Not then. Not when the only proof I had was turning into ash at my feet. Later that day, I tried once more to talk to Odessa. "I know you don't want to believe me," I said, standing stiff in the hallway while she sorted mail. "But I didn't imagine it. He took them." She didn't even stop sorting. "You're 13, Eden. You've been through something terrible, and I know you miss your parents." "That's not, let the adults take care of things," she cut in. "You just focus on healing. That word again. Healing, like I'd scraped my knee instead of watched my family disappear. I spent the rest of the day in silence. I didn't eat dinner. I didn't speak when Delmar checked in on me. I just stared out the window as the sun dipped behind the trees. When darkness settled across the yard, I stepped into the hallway. The door to my parents' old room stood wide open, the light off, the bed untouched. It felt like a hole had been punched into the center of the house, like everything was still, waiting. I stood there for a long time, barefoot on the hardwood floor, arms wrapped around my middle. Then I whispered, "If they won't listen, I'll make them hear me another way." I held that birth certificate in my hands longer than I should have. My fingers ran along the edge of the paper like it was a lifeline. My mother's handwriting was scribbled along the margin, not official, not neat, but it was hers, and it whispered louder than anyone in that house ever had. She hadn't abandoned me. She wouldn't. I folded the paper carefully and slid it beneath the mattress in the guest room, the one that still smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs. As I sat on the edge of the bed, my ears caught the low murmur of voices drifting up from downstairs. Odessa's voice was soft, almost dismissive, but the other belonged to a man I hadn't heard before. It was smooth, formal, businesslike. Curious, I crept out of the room and down the hallway, stopping just before the staircase. I crouched low and leaned into the railing. Their words came in bits and pieces. Already processed. Emergency transfer. Guardian paperwork. Needs the signature. I don't know if this is necessary. She's family, of course, but... Odessa's voice faltered. "Ma'am, the court recognizes Mr. Vexley as next of kin. With the parent's absence, this is the safest route." My stomach turned. It was happening. I didn't understand every legal term, but I knew enough. He was making it official. Delmar wasn't just acting like my guardian, he was becoming one. Later that afternoon, a man in a gray suit handed Odessa a folder and left through the front door. Odessa didn't look at me when she passed by, but I caught sight of the name on the top page as she closed it. Temporary Guardianship Approval, Delmar Vexley. I didn't ask. I didn't yell. What would have been the point? The next day, I walked to the end of the driveway to check the mail. Tucked between a local hardware store coupon booklet and a retirement magazine was a thin white envelope from the Buncombe County Family Court. I waited until I was back in the guest room before opening it. There it was, black ink on stiff paper. The state now recognized Delmar as my legal guardian, until further notice. In light of parental disappearance and in the best interest of the minor, it read. Best interest. Whose? 2 mornings later, the local news aired a brief segment. A blurry photo of my parents flashed on the screen under the headline, "Missing Couple, Last Seen Camping in Pisgah National Forest." The anchorwoman called it unusual but not unprecedented. Delmar stood in front of the camera, voice low and steady, claiming he was doing all he could to support his niece through this tragic time. "She's been through a lot," he said, placing a hand over his chest like he was receiving a medal. "But I'm here for her. We'll get through this." There was no mention of foul play, no mention of an investigation, no urgency, just a soft, sanitized summary of a family choosing to step away from the world for a while. I sat in the living room watching it unfold, while Odessa sat beside me, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. When the segment ended, she looked over at me and said, "It's good people know he's helping. It makes everything feel less chaotic." Less chaotic. Like reality was something you could organize in a spreadsheet. That night, I dreamed of my parents yelling my name from under the floorboards. When I woke, I stared at the ceiling until the sun crept in through the blinds. School was harder than I expected. It wasn't that the teachers treated me badly. If anything, they overcompensated, asking if I needed extra time on assignments, smiling a little too hard when I walked by. But Isla was different. We had been best friends since 2nd grade. She used to come over after school, eat microwave popcorn on my bedroom floor, and argue over which Twilight book was better. She was supposed to be the one person who'd get it. Instead, she avoided me. Not obviously at first, just slower replies, no lunch plans, one-word texts. It all became clear the moment I walked into the cafeteria. I spotted her across the room, laughing with two other girls I didn't recognize. When I waved, she froze. I made my way to her table anyway. "Hey," I said quietly. She didn't smile. She didn't move. The girl beside her, the one with the over-curled ponytail and too much lip gloss, said, "Is this the one?" Isla shifted in her seat, her eyes darting to her tray. "My mom said I shouldn't get involved," she muttered. My chest tightened. "What?" "She said your family's complicated, that your parents abandoned you." The words dropped like bricks. I started, but she cut me off. "I'm sorry, Eden. I really am. But I don't want to be part of this." That was the last sentence she said to me that day. When I got home, I didn't go inside right away. I sat on the back steps until the sky turned orange and the cicadas started singing. I didn't cry. Not then. Later, I opened Instagram. Isla had posted a photo. She stood beside Delmar, smiling like they were uncle and niece. The caption read, "So lucky to have strong men in our lives." I locked the phone, set it face down on the nightstand, and stared at the ceiling until long after the moon had risen. It was like Delmar wasn't just replacing my parents. He was replacing me. That night, as I rummaged through Odessa's filing cabinet for no reason other than to feel like I still had some control, I found a box labeled Eden. Inside were vaccination records, report cards, and tucked beneath a pile of preschool drawings, a sealed birth certificate. I unfolded it slowly. On the back, written in fading blue ink, were 3 words. "She is ours." My mother's handwriting. I ran my fingers across the letters and whispered, "You didn't leave me. I know you didn't." I stayed up most of that night, lying flat on my back with the shoebox tucked under my bed. I kept picturing my mother's watch, how scratched it was, how it definitely wasn't on her wrist when we left for the trip. The strap had dried mud stuck in the buckle, the kind you only get from walking through the forest after a storm. She never would have left it behind, not on purpose. By the time the sun rose, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to keep whispering. I needed someone to listen, really listen. I just had to find the right voice to reach. Delmar had gone out to run errands, his usual smug routine. "Groceries and a pharmacy stop, Eden. You need anything? More paper for those drawings you like so much?" His tone had a sweetness that made my skin crawl. "No," I answered, keeping my eyes on the floor. "Suit yourself. Don't wander, all right?" he said, flashing that politician smile he wore like a second skin. The moment I heard his tires leave the driveway, I moved. I crept into his office. No locked doors, because of course, he didn't think he needed them. I pulled the old landline off the hook. It had a slight static hum, like something from another time, but it still worked. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Eden Morin. My parents didn't run away. My uncle drugged them and locked them under the floor of our cabin in Pisgah. Please, you have to send someone. There was silence for a breath. Then the dispatcher's voice returned, calmer now. Can you confirm your location, sweetheart? I rattled off the address. I even spelled out the last name. My hands were sweating against the receiver. How long ago did this happen? 7 days. I tried to tell my grandmother, but no one believes me. He's lying. He made it all look like they left me. She paused. Can you stay on the line with me? But I heard the front door open downstairs. I hung up. Delmar walked in humming some 80s pop song, tossing the keys onto the kitchen counter. I shut the office door behind me like I'd been getting something from the printer. He didn't notice. 20 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up to the house. I watched from behind the curtains as they stepped out. I felt a flicker of hope spark in my chest. Maybe this time, maybe they'd see what I saw. Delmar greeted them on the porch with his arms wide like he was welcoming friends to a barbecue. "Oh, officers, what a surprise!" I came out a minute later, my voice trembling but clear. "He locked them under the floor at the cabin. There's a trap door he painted to look like wood." Delmar blinked but didn't flinch. "She's been through something awful," he said, turning to them like I wasn't even there. The stress has caused some imaginative thinking, but we're getting her help. One officer, a woman with a tight bun and tired eyes, knelt down in front of me. Sweetheart, is it possible you imagine this? Sometimes our brains try to make sense of scary things. No, I said, louder than I'd meant to. I saw him do it. They searched the house. I watched from the steps, fists clenched, as they checked the basement. Delmar followed them, pointing out renovations like he was hosting a home tour. Of course, they didn't find anything. The trapdoor wasn't here. It was at the cabin. And even then, he'd covered it, hidden it like he was burying bones. When they returned upstairs, Delmar gave me a look that could cut glass. He thanked the officers, shaking hands like it was a press event. Then, right in front of them, he walked over and pulled me into a hug. His arm wrapped around my shoulder, his grip just a little too tight. "You're safe now," he whispered through clenched teeth. "Stop." That night, I sat on the couch in silence as a segment played on the local news. It was called Family Tragedies, the Faces Behind the Headlines. Delmar was featured, standing in front of our house, eyes misty, voice low. "She's just a little girl," he said, trying to make sense of something horrible. Her mother, well, she struggled, had outbursts. We're all doing the best we can. The screen cut to a grainy video, my mom raising her voice at me about cleaning my room. It had been taken months ago during a bad week when her father had passed away. They made her look unhinged. Comments started flooding in under the news station's Facebook post. Maybe the mom cracked. Poor kid. Thank God for that uncle. Delmar sat at the kitchen table later that night, sipping coffee, like he hadn't just erased my mother from existence. I waited until he went to bed. I crept into the hallway and made my way toward the storage closet near the garage. I remembered Mom used to keep old boxes there, keepsakes, journals, random things she couldn't bring herself to throw out. I searched for an hour, and there it was, at the bottom of a plastic bin beneath a stack of dusty Christmas decorations, her watch, the one she wore every day, the one she'd never leave behind. The leather strap was torn, the face scratched like it had scraped against stone. It was still ticking, faintly. I held it to my chest. She didn't leave it. She didn't leave me. She didn't leave anything. She was taken. I put the watch in a shoebox under my bed, wrapping it in an old t-shirt. It wasn't much, but it was something. A sign. A sliver of truth I could hold on to. "You left me a sign," I whispered. "I'll find the rest." I didn't sleep much that night. I kept my shoes on. I don't know why, exactly. Maybe because part of me believed there was a chance, however small, that I might need to leave in a hurry. Or maybe because that tiny music box, stuffed inside the toe of my left sneaker next to my mom's note, felt more real than the walls around me. The house creaked with the weight of quiet lies. Delmar was already snoring in the room across the hall, like nothing in the world could touch him. Odessa had retired early, as usual, claiming she needed a moment of peace from all the worry. But I didn't buy that. None of this was about peace. It was about erasing everything I knew. I sat upright on the bed and hugged my old stuffed bunny to my chest, the same one I'd had since I was 4. Its ears were frayed, the pink ribbon around its neck mostly worn away. As I pressed it closer, I heard something. Not outside. Not from the hallway. It came from inside the bunny. I stilled, heart hammering. Then slowly, I turned the toy over and ran my fingers along its seam. Sure enough, there was a rough stitch across the bottom of its back leg, messy, uneven, like someone had sewn it shut in a rush. I grabbed the small sewing scissors from my art kit and carefully snipped the thread. My hands were shaking, but I didn't stop. Inside was a piece of crumpled paper, folded and yellowed. I unfolded it like it was a prayer. The handwriting was unmistakable. Mom's loopy cursive, always slanted just slightly to the right. And the date? The very morning we left for the trip. "If they ask, stay quiet. Someone will come. Don't forget who you are. Mom." I read the words 3 times, then a 4th. My chest ached so hard it felt like my ribs were splintering. She knew. She knew something was going to happen. Or maybe she knew she couldn't stop it. But instead of leaving me with nothing, she left this, hidden, buried in the only place she knew I'd eventually check. I lay back on the bed, clutched the bunny tight, and wept. Not loudly, just tears leaking down the sides of my face and into my pillowcase. The next morning, after forcing down half a piece of toast under Delmar's watchful eye, I went upstairs and opened the hallway attic door. It hadn't been touched in years. Odessa claimed her knees didn't agree with ladders anymore, and Delmar had no reason to dig through family junk. I climbed up into the space, coughing through the dust. I moved box after box, ignoring the photos, the Christmas wreaths, the boxes labeled Dad's Tools. Eventually, near the far corner behind a stack of old scarves, I found it, a music box. It was rectangular, wooden, with a delicate flower carved into the lid. I remembered it from my parents' room, one of those things Mom never let me touch. I had always assumed it was just broken. I sat down and turned the key on the bottom until it caught. The lullaby began, a simple, fragile melody, and then a click. A soft voice crackled through the music just above the tune, faint but unmistakable. If you hear this, we didn't leave you. We were taken. Eden, baby. Trust yourself. We love you. Don't forget that. I dropped it. The box hit the floor and the sound stopped immediately. I didn't pick it up right away. I sat frozen, staring at the dust motes dancing in the sunlight cutting through the attic window. They hadn't left. They were stolen, just like I'd always known. I carried the music box back downstairs and locked it in my backpack. For the rest of the day, I didn't speak much. Odessa didn't press. Delmar kept up his usual routine of half smiles and fake warmth. I watched him move around the kitchen, wondering how someone could make coffee with the same hands that had dragged my parents away. That night, I spread my sketch pad across my bed. But this time, I didn't draw faces or trapdoors. I made a map. Our cabin, the woods, the last trail we walked. I marked the approximate location of the cabin with an X and labeled what I remembered about the inside, the back room, the basement entrance, the rug that didn't match the rest of the decor. And then I remembered something else, something Delmar had said the day after we got back, while talking to a neighbor at the mailbox. "Basements are overrated," he laughed. "Crawl spaces are cleaner." It sounded harmless at the time, but now it felt like a breadcrumb. I went down to the basement around 9, claiming I needed to find an old school project. Odessa nodded, half asleep in her recliner, and Delmar barely looked up from his Sudoku book. I took my time. Most of the floor was unfinished, concrete with cracks and patches, but near the far right corner, one plank looked different. It was smoother, sanded, newer wood, maybe 6 months old, with no dust on it. I pressed my palm against it and held my breath. Nothing. But the seam was there, barely visible. I marked it in my notebook and returned upstairs. From that point on, everything changed. I started documenting everything, every sentence Delmar said, every contradiction, every slip. I wrote it all in a new journal, one that stayed hidden in the back of my closet under a box of old shoes. I didn't know what would be enough to convince anyone. But I wasn't waiting around to be believed anymore. I was going to build the truth piece by piece until it was too loud to ignore. I copied the music box recording onto a flash drive at school. I stashed the note from my bunny inside an empty lip balm container. I taped a tiny microphone under the hallway table near the phone. Every move I made was deliberate now. Delmar started noticing. He didn't say anything directly, but I saw it in the way his eyes followed me longer than necessary, the way he double-checked locks, the way his smile tightened when he asked, "Everything okay, sweetheart?" I nodded, always, but in my head, I repeated one line over and over, just in case I disappear next. After labeling the Ziploc bag, I tucked it behind the vent cover beneath my desk, one of the few spots in the house I was sure Delmar wouldn't check. He never came into my room unless Odessa asked him to bring up clean towels or fix the Wi-Fi. And when he did, it was always brief, like he couldn't stomach being in the same space with me too long without slipping. I sat on the carpet for a moment longer, listening to the late-night murmurs from downstairs. The TV droned on, voices from a rerun crime drama echoing through the air vents, fitting in a twisted way. I could hear Delmar laughing occasionally, like everything in his world was falling into place. But he was wrong. I was getting closer. The next morning, Odessa asked me to dust the bookshelves in Delmar's office. "It's your room too, in a way," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You should feel comfortable in every corner of this house." I didn't answer, just nodded and went upstairs with the rag and lemon-scented spray in hand. The office was too clean, too perfect. Every pencil aligned, every file drawer locked. But one thing caught my eye: a recipe book. It was one of those thick, spiral-bound types with tabs sticking out. I'd seen Mom flip through it years ago during the holidays. Something told me it didn't belong there. I opened it slowly, thumbing through pages until a note slipped out between the index and a dog-eared pie crust recipe. "Ever hope? Use this name. Ask Vigo." My breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, not just the looped letters, but the way she always dotted her I's with slightly tilted ovals. I tucked the note into my waistband and closed the book. Later, when Delmar left for his midday meeting, which I assumed was just code for visiting someone who thought he was a godsend, I raced to the guest room with my laptop. I typed "Everhope Trust Fund" into the search bar. Dozens of results came up. Most were obscure financial articles, nonprofit registration documents, and one hit on a private legal consulting firm in North Carolina. But one entry stood out: a charitable trust with a secured guardian override clause, established 15 years ago under the names Callan and Sarah Lennox, my parents. Then I saw it. A red banner, restricted, under temporary guardian authorization. My stomach dropped. I checked the contact information at the bottom. One name and email: vigo@haldenfirm.com. So it was real. All of it. Mom's plan wasn't just to leave clues. She'd prepared something that was now under Delmar's control. I copied the email down into my journal, but didn't send anything. Not yet. Not until I had more. That night, I asked Odessa if I could eat dinner with them at the main table. She looked surprised, but didn't question it. Delmar acted like it was some kind of family reunion. "Well, look who's decided to join the living," he said with a smirk, carving into his pork chop. "We missed your sparkling conversation." I sat across from him, slowly stirring my mashed potatoes. "Do you remember," I said carefully, "how Mom used to hate the basement vent in the cabin? Said it made this screeching noise that kept her up?" His fork paused halfway to his mouth. Just for a second. Then he laughed, but it was half a beat too slow. "She always hated weird noises, couldn't stand creaky floors or ticking clocks." I kept my face blank. There is no vent in the basement of our house, and the cabin's vent was the only one that ever screeched. It wasn't something you could forget, especially not if you'd heard her complain about it a dozen times, like he apparently had. But according to him, he never stepped foot in that cabin, not after dropping us off, not after he left for the weekend. His reaction told me otherwise. After dinner, I excused myself early and went straight to my room. I closed the door quietly, sat at my desk, and pulled out my journal. He reacted. That means he was there. He remembers what she said. He knows I know. I felt something shift in my chest. Not fear, not sadness. Something harder, sharper. I opened my laptop again and stared at the email I'd written to Vigo Halden. It was simple. Subject: Everhope Trust. Message: My name is Eden Morin. I believe someone has fraudulently activated my parents' trust. I need to know who authorized it. I hovered over the send button, but I didn't click. Not yet. I had one last move to make. The next morning, I emptied the contents of my hiding spots: my mom's note, the printout of the Everhope record, the flash drive with the music box recording, and my journal. I put them all in a heavy-duty Ziploc and labeled it in thick marker. If they don't believe me, show them this. Then I unscrewed the air vent near my desk and shoved the bag as deep inside as it would go. I covered it back up, tightened the screws, and stood there a moment, just breathing. I didn't sleep that night because I was scared. I slept with my door locked because I had work to do. He had no idea that I had already shifted the game. I slid the vent cover back into place, my fingers pressing the last screw firm against the wall. My chest rose and fell in measured, deliberate breaths. If something happened to me now, at least the truth would have somewhere to land. Downstairs, I could hear Odessa laughing, muffled and distant, at whatever Delmar was saying on the phone. It was past 9, but he'd made a fresh pot of coffee. The smell floated up through the stairwell, mixing with the sharp citrus of the cleaner I used earlier in the day. By morning, everything about him would look like concern. The next day, he told me to wear something presentable. I was to sit beside him for a segment being filmed by a local news crew. Community outreach, he called it, while adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. I think it's important people see we're a united front, he said, smoothing his collar. Public perception, Eden. That matters. Especially when things are messy. He glanced at me through the mirror's reflection, waiting for me to respond. I just nodded and walked to the front door without a word. The broadcast took place at the local community center, the same one where I used to take art classes. I hadn't stepped inside that building since before the camping trip. Now it felt unfamiliar, too bright. The news crew had set up a simple backdrop, 2 chairs, some potted plants, and a banner behind us that read, "Raising Someone Else's Child, the Stories Behind the Stories." Delmar's smile was glued to his face from the second the cameras started rolling. "I just want what's best for her," he said, blinking twice, perfectly timed with his sigh. "It's been difficult, but she's a good kid. She's just confused. Trauma does that to children." He reached over and placed his hand on mine. I flinched, not dramatically, not enough to make a sound. But the cameraman zoomed in at the exact moment his thumb pressed against the side of my wrist, right where the bruise was still faintly visible. Delmar noticed too. I saw it in the slight tightening of his jaw, but he didn't move his hand. I held my breath until the segment ended. When we returned home, he barely spoke. He poured himself a drink, not coffee this time, and paced the kitchen while Odessa reheated leftovers. By midnight, I checked the local station's online video feed. The segment had already aired. And there, right in the middle of a 5-minute fluff piece about community resilience and foster guardianship, was my hand, bruised, pulled away. The comment section lit up within minutes. Did anyone else see the girl flinch? She didn't even look at him once. Why's her wrist bruised? Somebody check on that kid. I copied the link and sent it to my school email, just in case. The next day, I kept to myself. I avoided eye contact. I acted like everything was normal. At lunch, Delmar didn't say a word about the video, but his mood had shifted. He wasn't angry. He was careful, calculating. Later that evening, I got a message on the school's shared computer system. It was from Madden Orick, the young cop who was there the first time I called 911. Subject, cabin footage. Message, we pulled the security footage from the campsite. Days 5 and 6 are missing, either deleted or corrupted, but the drive shows recent edits. Someone accessed it last week. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. Reply. Thank you. That was all I could say. All I needed to say. I jotted the update down in my journal. He's covering his tracks, faster than I can uncover them. But that was fine, because I'd already taken the next step. The night before, I'd walked into the public library 3 blocks down. I signed in at the computer under a fake name, Claire Foster. I kept the hood of my sweatshirt low, and the librarian didn't ask questions. I opened the browser, turned on the voice modulator app, and called the number listed on the Halden legal site. It rang twice before going to voicemail. Ever Hope Trust, I said into the mic. Check the signature on the transfer, then call me back. This isn't over. I hung up. Cleared the browser history, wiped the headphones, walked out. That evening, as the sun dipped past the tree line and Odessa dozed off in her recliner, I went back to my room. I took the music box out from my dresser drawer and ran my fingers over the carved lid. I didn't open it, didn't need to. I knew the message by heart. If you hear this, we didn't leave you. We were taken. I lifted the vent cover one more time, checked that the Ziploc bag was still buried inside, and secured it again. Everything he'd tried to erase, I was bringing back to light. Then I whispered toward the hallway, toward the silence that wrapped this house like a blanket. Your mask is slipping, Delmar. Keep talking. By the time I finished whispering those words, I already knew I had crossed a line he wouldn't forgive. Delmar wasn't the type to shout. He wasn't loud like the men who punched walls and blamed whiskey. No, he was surgical. Quiet. He'd cut you without ever raising his voice, and the worst part was, you'd thank him for the lesson. But tonight was different. Something about the air felt brittle. The house was too still. I could hear every breath he took, even rooms away, as if he were rehearsing, deciding how to respond now that the spotlight had shifted, even just an inch. After dinner, I left a folded draft of my Everhope email where he'd be sure to find it, wedged just slightly between the pages of a magazine he always flipped through while Odessa loaded the dishwasher. It didn't take long. Maybe 15 minutes later, I heard the magazine slap the kitchen counter, then the scrape of the chair legs, then footsteps, slow, measured, coming toward me. I sat at the dining table pretending to read the local newspaper, the one Odessa subscribed to mostly for the Sunday coupons. I kept my eyes on a headline about a ribbon-cutting ceremony at the senior center, though my hands were clenched in my lap beneath the tablecloth. He stopped at the edge of the room. "Where'd you get that?" he asked calmly. I didn't look up. "What?" "You know what I'm talking about." I met his gaze. It was in Mom's Bible. She wrote it down. He blinked once, just once, but I saw the flash in his eyes. "Don't go digging through things that aren't yours, Eden." I shrugged. "Her Bible's mine now, right? Since she's gone." He didn't say a word. He just turned, walked over to the silverware drawer, and slammed it shut with so much force the forks rattled. Then he left the room. I waited a full 2 minutes before breathing again. That night at dinner, Odessa talked about a church bake sale like we hadn't just stared into the edge of war an hour earlier. Delmar sliced roast beef and passed it to me without a word. Halfway through chewing a bite of steamed carrots, I dropped it. "Hey, do you remember how Mom used to complain about the chirping noise from the back vent in the cabin?" I asked, as casually as if I were asking for salt. Delmar froze, just for a second, but his knife hesitated in mid-air. "She hated everything noisy," he said finally, placing the blade against his plate a little too neatly. Old plumbing, dogs barking, wind through the windows. His voice was too even, but he slipped, because that vent didn't exist, at least not here. It was only in the cabin, the one he claimed he never went back to, the one where I saw him drag their bodies. I nodded slowly and returned to my food. He didn't speak for the rest of dinner. Later that evening, Odessa went to bed early with a cup of chamomile tea and her crossword puzzle book. That left just the two of us. I carried my plate into the kitchen, rinsed it, and stood at the sink a moment too long. "Did you enjoy your little performance at dinner?" he said behind me. I turned slowly. "You mean the one where I asked a normal question?" "You think you're clever," he said, stepping closer. "You think you're going to trap me. I don't have to. You're already unraveling." His smile dropped. "You need to be very careful, Eden." "Or what?" I asked. "You'll make me disappear too?" He stepped forward, just one step, and that was enough. I bolted. Out the back door, across the porch. My journal was still in my pocket, sticking out just enough to be noticeable. He followed. I didn't make it far. I stopped at the fence line where the yard met Agatha Murney's. She was on her porch, watering plants like she always did around that hour, wearing her usual thick sweater and house slippers even though the weather didn't call for it. I turned just as Delmar caught up. He grabbed the edge of my shirt and yanked. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed. "I'm done being quiet," I said. That's when it happened. He slapped me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't theatrical. But it was loud, sharp, and it knocked me off balance. I stumbled, caught the fence, and looked up. Agatha was standing now. Her watering can hit the porch with a loud clang. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" she yelled across the lawn. Delmar turned toward her, face pale. Agatha didn't wait for a response. She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out her cell phone. "I saw you. You put your hands on her, and I am calling the police right now." Delmar didn't say a word. He backed up slowly, hands up like she had a gun. She's been acting out," he stammered. You don't know what's been going on. Oh, I know plenty, Agatha snapped. You don't raise your hand to a child. Not ever, and certainly not in front of someone who still knows right from wrong. He looked at me, then back at her, then turned and went back inside. I stood there, hand to my cheek, the sting still fresh. Agatha didn't come down the stairs. She didn't rush over with a hug or a blanket or a cookie. She just stood there like a witness who had seen exactly what needed to be seen. The sirens came 15 minutes later. Blue and red flashed across the white paneling of the house. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Someone recorded a video. Delmar didn't come back outside. A female officer took my statement. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. He was always this way, I told her. Now someone else sees it. The officer nodded solemnly and handed me a tissue I didn't need. They took photos of the mark on my face, measured the bruise, logged the time, collected Agatha's statement too. As they wrapped up, I looked down the street. The world felt different. Something had shifted. Not enough to make me safe, but enough to know the silence was breaking. I closed my eyes as the sirens began to fade. You wanted me quiet, I whispered to myself. Now everyone's listening. The flashing lights hadn't even faded from our street before the call came in. Not to me, no one called me directly, but I heard Thayer Rook's voice downstairs, calm but unmistakably sharper than usual. Agatha's statement was enough to move the needle, he said, but it wasn't just her testimony. We got the cabin footage restored. I crept down the stairs just far enough to see the blue of his jacket collar peeking out from behind the kitchen archway. Delmar was nowhere in sight. Odessa was seated stiffly at the table, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that hadn't been filled. Thayer continued. We saw it, Eden. Not all of it, but enough. I didn't speak, just nodded once from the stairs. That was all it took. We're going, he said. And just like that, I was back in that car, this time with 2 squad SUVs behind us, heading up the winding roads toward the cabin I thought I'd never see again. The tires rumbled over loose gravel as the tree canopy thickened above us. Thayer rode up front. Madden Oric was beside me in the back seat, flipping through a folder with my name written on a sticky tab. He didn't look at me while he spoke. The hard drive had been tampered with, 2 days gone, but the recovery team found traces, pieces that couldn't be erased without leaving a digital footprint. You were telling the truth the whole time. I didn't answer him either. I didn't need to. The cabin looked exactly as I remembered it, slouched into the forest like it knew what it had done. The porch sagged slightly on the left side, the shutters hung crooked, but it was quiet, still. Inside, the floorboards groaned under our boots. Madden motioned for me to lead them. I moved toward the back room. The same rug was still there, hiding the same uneven edge I'd memorized in my sketchbook. I knelt, peeled it back, and tapped my fingers against the board I knew was different. Thayer stepped forward with a crowbar. The wood resisted at first, like it knew it had been found out. But then it gave. The crowbar slipped underneath, pried up the board, and the smell hit us all at once. Damp earth, mildew, something older and heavier, like time that had gone rancid. Underneath was a trap door, rusted hinges, no handle. Thayer looked at me. Are you sure? I nodded once. That's where they are. Madden knelt, forced the crowbar against the rusted edge, and pried. The hinges squealed like they hadn't moved in years. A thick wave of air pushed upward, stale and wet. And then, a knock. Barely a sound, just once, but we all heard it. I stepped back. My hands trembled as I whispered, That's my mom. Thayer shouted down into the dark. Callan, Sarah Lennox, this is the Asheville Police Department. If you can hear me, we're here to help. The knock came again, and again. I didn't see the next few minutes, not really, just flashes. Madden and another officer dropping into the hole with flashlights. Voices echoing below. A stretcher being called for. Oxygen masks being opened. And then I saw them. My father first, his beard ragged, his face drawn and pale, but his eyes alert. His body had shrunk into itself, but his arms still open the moment he saw me. Behind him, my mother, thinner than I'd ever seen her, lips cracked, skin graying around the edges, but alive. "Eden?" she rasped. I ran to her. She couldn't catch me, but she tried. Her fingers brushed my cheek before she collapsed against the medic behind her. "Is she okay?" she asked over and over again, even when they were trying to lift her onto the stretcher. "Is my daughter okay?" "I'm fine," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm right here. I'm okay now." They wrapped blankets around both of them. The medics were efficient, calm, but I could see it in their faces. They weren't used to pulling people out alive. Not like this. Once my parents were safely inside the ambulance, Thayer handed me a manila folder. "You should see this." Inside were the documents Delmar had forged, signature mismatches, authorization requests, fund withdrawals under guardian consent, a paper trail of theft and lies. "He didn't just take their freedom," Madden said. "He tried to take their daughter and their future." We drove back into town in silence. I sat in the back of the cruiser, arms wrapped around my knees, the folder still clutched to my chest. Delmar didn't know we were coming. He was hosting a charity luncheon. Of course he was. Press, name tags, music, the works. When the police entered, he didn't even flinch at first. He smiled, raised a glass, said, "I didn't expect this level of support." And then he saw me. The blood drained from his face like someone had flipped a switch. I stood beside Thayer as they read him his rights. As reporters swarmed, as his carefully built lie began to crumble, he said nothing, not a word, but his eyes locked on mine the entire time. The headline hit the local news later that night. "Teen's claims lead to arrest in high-profile kidnapping. She never stopped believing." Some called me a liar. Others called me brave. Most just stared at the photos and asked how something like this could happen in a town like ours. They didn't know half of it. At the police station, after giving my last official statement, I waited alone in the lobby until one of the officers returned something to me. My mother's scarf, the one she always wore when she didn't feel strong, like it gave her protection. I held it in my lap for a long time. "They were under the floor," I said softly. "And I'll never let anyone bury me again." 2 weeks later, I was back in the hospital, but this time, not as a case number, not as a false alarm, not as a child no one would listen to. I was there to sit beside my mother. The lights in the recovery room were soft, casting gentle shadows on the linoleum floor. The beep of her heart monitor was steady now, not frantic like the night they pulled her and my father from beneath the floor. Her hair was thinner, her face drawn, but her eyes, those eyes still carried fire. I sat beside her with her scarf wrapped around my fingers. It smelled faintly of chamomile and something I couldn't quite name, something that reminded me of bedtime stories and burned toast and laughter that used to fill our house before everything got stolen. She opened her eyes slowly. "You never stopped believing, did you?" she whispered. I tried to speak, but the lump in my throat had other plans. I just shook my head. She reached out, barely able to lift her hand, and rested it on top of mine. Her touch was weak, but it grounded me. It told me everything I needed to know, that this moment was real, that I had made it to the other side. The next day, I wore my cleanest jeans and a button-up shirt. Odessa called it Sunday service formal. She'd been quieter since the arrest, less performative, more deliberate. She didn't say much, but she did something no one else expected. She walked into court with a weathered envelope in her hands. "I need to speak," she said clearly, voice loud enough to carry across the rows of wooden benches. The judge, an older man with a thick neck and a permanent frown, raised an eyebrow. "Proceed, Mrs. Byrne." She stepped forward and handed the envelope to Vigo Halden, who scanned its contents before glancing up in surprise. "This is the original trust assignment," he confirmed, "the one that predates all of Delmar Vexley's filings." Odessa faced the room. "I found it in a box I hadn't opened in years. It had my daughter-in-law's handwriting, and Callan's signature. Delmar lied. I believed him because he was my son. But he used me. Just like he used Eden. I didn't expect to feel pity for her. But I did. The judge didn't need more than that. In a single ruling, he revoked Delmar's guardianship, froze all access to the trust fund, and reinstated my parents' authority, pending their full recovery. Ms. Morin, the judge said, looking directly at me. I owe you an apology on behalf of this court. I nodded. I didn't need an apology. I just needed it on record. The sentencing came a week later. Delmar stood in front of a different judge this time, wearing a plain gray jumpsuit, his once pristine hair now tangled at the edges. His lawyer advised him to take a plea. He didn't fight it. He pled guilty to unlawful imprisonment, financial fraud, falsifying documents, and child endangerment. 25 years without the possibility of parole. When they led him away in cuffs, he turned and looked at me. Not at my parents, not at Odessa, just me. You ruined me, he mouthed. I didn't blink. I mouthed back. You did that yourself. It was raining the day we returned home. Not a dramatic storm, just a steady drizzle that softened everything, the kind that made the pavement smell clean again. The house was exactly as we'd left it, except nothing felt the same. Mom walked in first, clutching Dad's arm for balance. I followed behind them, suddenly smaller than I remembered being. Every picture on the wall was still there, every piece of furniture in its place, but something in the air had shifted, like the house had held its breath for weeks, and now it didn't know how to exhale. I went to my room, opened the door slowly. The music box was still tucked beneath my pillow. I sat on the edge of the bed and picked it up. I didn't wind it this time. I just held it, like a reminder of everything that came before. Across the room, my sketchpad rested on the nightstand. I flipped through it, page after page. Some of the drawings were smudged, others half-finished, but they all told the same story. A girl no one heard, who found her own voice when no one offered one. But now the drawings had changed. There were flowers, sunlight breaking through treetops. A porch swing with two people sitting side by side, one with a blanket over her lap, the other holding a pencil. I walked down the hall. Mom was sitting in the living room, a cup of tea in her hand, her legs tucked beneath her on the couch like she used to do when reading. She looked up and smiled when I entered. What will you draw next? She asked softly. I thought about it for a long moment. Then I looked out the window, watching the rain slide down the glass in steady streams. Something louder than silence, I said. Sometimes the most dangerous lies aren't the ones we tell, they're the ones we choose to believe. Eden's story reminds us that silence can be a prison, but truth, spoken or drawn, has the power to set everything free. Have you ever been dismissed simply because you were too young, too quiet, or too inconvenient? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more true inspired stories that challenge, haunt, and heal, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come.